Hey guys, Argent Templar here. Now this is going to be relatively brief, just because I can go on forever, and I was just trying to pick some highlights. This one's probably the least polished, and I'll probably do a revised version of some of it. I just kind of figured you deserve to have this series finished. The rest of them I think are pretty good. The ontological one isn't great. That's just the nature of it though. So this one will probably be revised at some point. So this is the argument from authority, aka smart people and God. Okay, so we're going to start with a quote from Isaac Newton. This most beautiful systems, this most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the consulate and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. So that's Isaac Newton. We're going to go through some estimated IQs just because I find them interesting. I kind of find historical IQ an interesting concept, trying to compare the geniuses of the past to the geniuses of today. So Isaac Newton incidentally wrote more on the Bible and interpretation of prophecy than he did on physics. It was something like I forget, it was like 1,000,000 words or something he wrote on biblical prophecy. His papers were left with the Royal Society, which actually suppressed a lot of his religious writings because, well, they were anti-religion and they didn't want it to get out that the greatest physicist of all time was kind of a mystic. So, admittedly, this is not much of an argument, more a response to the common objection to people who state that only dumb people believe in God or that science and faith are incompatible. This is kind of a trope. I hear this a lot. No matter how many times it's disproved, I just have to go into it just a little. Um, this isn't really like, obviously there are smart people. You can find smart people who support anything, but the argument is that all Christians are dumb or all religious people are dumb and their religion is what contributes to them being dumb, and if they were smart they wouldn't hold that view. There's kind of a view that anyone who's religious is like a southern redneck from like a trailer park who can't read and sleeps with their cousin. Um, so just we're going to look at some of these smarter people. So despite what the new atheists say, history is littered with men who are among the brightest and best of their age and of any age. These are men who invented some of the greatest innovations and made the largest discoveries of all time. Many of the men were not only believers, but they were active and involved in their faith above and beyond what was necessary for the time. So this is often what the new atheists will say. Well, they were part of a religion because everyone was religious. Well, that's not exactly true. I mean, atheism has existed forever. Irreligion has existed forever. Irreligion was not uncommon. People would be formally part of a church, but they were, in effect, atheistic. You see this a lot in Game of Thrones, where people will occasionally do rituals, etc., but they don't really believe in it. That was fairly common. It's just that religion back then was a bit like ethnicity or culture. You were just born with it. This continues in the Middle East, where it says on your identity card what your religion is, because it's to some extent a ethno-cultural identity. So there have always been skeptics. They may not have called themselves atheists, like Darwin didn't call himself an atheist, but they certainly existed. And to be actively religious, even back in the day, some people who were so actively religious, they were looked down upon by the rest of society, who were only rather tepid about it. So, to say that only stupid or crazy people believe in God is to dismiss some of the greatest minds in history. Um, that's what I often hear. Oh, you're crazy, you're delusional, you're stupid. And a lot of these people were pretty smart. They may not have been theologians, but isn't that kind of what the point of the new atheists, that we should listen to what scientists say? So I've included a kind of a variety. I've also included historical IQs because I find them interesting. So we're going to start off with Rene Descartes, who had an estimated IQ of 180. So he is one of history's greatest minds. He invented graphing. Yeah, just graphing. You know, XY coordinates? That's called a Cartesian plane, or Cartesian coordinates. He invented the X and Y coordinates and thus graphing. which is used in everything ever. So that's just how much of a genius Rene Descartes was. He also made some huge advances in analytical philosophy, optics. He tried his hand at biology, but he wasn't particularly good at it. His theory of how the heart worked was pretty bad, but I mean this was like not even the Enlightenment yet. So I think this was the scientific revolution. Um, yeah, scientific revolution. So I mean they're just figuring this stuff out. So Rene Descartes created the statement, I think, therefore I am, probably the most famous line in all philosophy, which a lot of people forget, but it was part of his attempt to prove God's existence. First, you prove yourself, then you prove the external world exists, and he thought by doing that you could prove that God exists. So he was a devout Catholic all his life. He was hired to be the teacher of the Queen of Sweden, and he converted her to Catholicism. There's not a lot of Catholics in Sweden. So to convince the Queen of a 100% Protestant country to convert to a foreign religion must have taken dedication. He wound up dying from pneumonia actually when he was up in Sweden. So he was devoted to Mother Church his whole life. I guess maybe some of his views were a little pushed the envelope a bit, but I don't think he ever really questioned core doctrine. Um, so Rene Descartes had a religious vision when he was 24, and he believed that it was his life's mission to bring all knowledge together into one logical, analytical system, and for that system to be accepted as part of Catholic doctrine, and essentially just for Catholicism to cover all aspects of life, including science, reason, etc. So Rene Descartes, a very religious man, very high IQ, made some immense contributions to just the history of to knowledge and science. So then we have Gregor Mendel. So Gregor Mendel was a German-speaking Czech priest and friar. For those of you who don't know, friar is a type of monk who preaches. Regular monks live in monasteries and withdraw from the world. Friars go around and preach. They're both monks and they both take monastic vows, but friars are more public and more involved in the world. So Gregor Mendel is the discoverer of genetics, and I've seen his IQ estimated at being over 160. So he is the one who coined the terms recessive and dominant, as well as many other genes. So he kind of was trying to figure out how evolution worked. Evolution had existed long before Darwin. St. Augustine referred to a type of evolution where he talked about God may have planted a seed and let the world unfold um, and grow like a tree, kind of. Obviously a metaphor. He didn't think the world was actually a tree. There was other theories of evolution, such as Lamarckian evolution, and it was an established concept. Darwin didn't really create the theory of evolution. He created the explanation for it. Gregor Mendel explained how evolution worked, what the mechanism was that of heritability. So he discovered this by breeding together pea plants and different small animals, and he was able to determine. Here's kind of an example. This is a recessive gene, and that's a dominant gene. So the white flower has two white genes. The red flower has two red genes. Red is a dominant trait, so all the successor flowers will carry a white gene, but the red gene will be dominant, so the flowers will all be red. However, if you breed these plants together because they carry the white gene, there's a 1 in 4 chance that their offspring will have two white genes and the flower will be white. Um, Also recall from earlier that George Lemaitre, I can't pronounce it, it's French, the formulator of the Big Bang Theory was a priest. The person who came up with the Big Bang Theory, the expansion of the universe, etc., was I believe, a Jesuit. I think he was a Jesuit priest from Belgium. Um, and that was actually, interestingly enough, the Big Bang was one of, as I've said, the big things that kind of revived classical apologetics, because it ended the idea that the universe was eternal once and for all, and kind of started shifting things towards creationism. And I mean creationism in that God created the universe. I don't mean young Earth creationism. Then we have Michael Faraday, who lived from 1791 to 1867, who is one of the probably the most successful scientists in history. I might actually just reading about him. I might actually call him the greatest scientist in history. His his accomplishments are staggering. So he discovered the laws of electrosis. I think that's something to do with fluids and electricity. I'm not exactly sure how it works. Um, I think electrosis is how you separate water into hydrogen and oxygen, and just how you use electricity with liquids in general. But that was a big discovery. He also discovered the attractive and repellent, aka positive and negative forces of magnets, and thus the basics of electromagnetism. So he discovered basically how one of the fundamental forces of the universe worked. He discovered how magnets work. He created an early form of the Bunsen burner, one of the most used tools in all of chemistry, and he also invented a little thing called the electric motor, which is one of the probably top 10 greatest discoveries in history, along with the printing press, the internet, the light bulb, etc. I mean, it changed everything. It's one of the things that completely and utterly altered the very way we live. So this is kind of his quote of what he said upon being asked about God when he discovered all of this stuff. Um, the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead. Um, and I have never seen anything incompatible between those things of man which can be known by the spirit of man which is within him, and those things concerning his future which he cannot know by that spirit. So basically he's saying that in the laws of nature he can see the presence of God, and that to him there was no incompatibility between his faith and his immense achievements in science. So Michael Faraday was a deeply religious man who served as a deacon in the Presbyterian Church, and he frequently turned down rewards, including being knighted on religious grounds. He just wanted to remember. He didn't want to be a sir. He just wanted to be remembered as Mikey or Michael or something. Just Mr. Faraday. He didn't really. He thought it was corrosive to the soul um, to sell his kind of inventions and sell his character and to become rich and famous and powerful. He just kind of wanted to be a humble man, live with his family, make some breakthroughs in science, and be loyal to his church. Um, so very much kind of a simplistic Christian life he sought, while at the same time making immense advancements in science and technology. So then we have Mozart. I just including a variety of different people. Mozart's obviously not a scientist, but I figured I'd include a couple artists too. So Mozart's estimated IQ is about 160, obviously genius range. Mozart is widely considered one of, if not the greatest composer of all time. I think Beethoven is generally considered the greatest, and Mozart is the second greatest. It depends on who you ask, though. So Mozart was somewhat less observant of certain Catholic practices like fasting. Keep in mind there's a lot more just practices that people did back in the day that they don't do now. And some people were more or less observant. Basically today being a devout Catholic means you like pray once a day and go to church once a week, and you go on a couple extra feast days. But back in the day there was like 30 or 40 feast days a year, and there was fasting, and there was a ton of extra other stuff. So from my understanding, Mozart did go to mass, like would have gone to mass every week. He did go to confession, etc. He just wasn't that keen on like fasting, which is fine because a lot of people aren't that keen on fasting. It's nowadays it's kind of an optional spiritual practice. So by today's standards, Mozart would be like a traditionalist, not being the most observant. In his case, I just throw that out there because some people try to say he was like not devoted to the church or whatever, but he clearly was. This is a quote from him. I have always had God before my eyes. I know myself, and I have such a sense of religion that I shall never do anything which I would not do before the whole world. But I am alarmed at the very thoughts of being in the society of people during my journey, whose mode of thinking is so entirely different from mine, and from that of all good people. But of course they must do as they please. I have no heart to travel with them, nor could I enjoy one pleasant hour, nor know what to talk about, for in short, I have no great confidence in them. Friends who have no religion cannot long be our friends. So I think that reveals a very deep religious faith that kind of drove Mozart, and Mozart did a lot of religious music as well. So don't believe Amadeus. Amadeus is kind of a hit job. So then there's a couple directors who were practicing Catholics. Hitchcock was a practicing Catholic. Frank Capra was, who did Life is no I'm trying to remember what the movie's called. The one It's a Beautiful Life, and John Ford also did a number of great movies. They were kind of the biggest directors of the 40s and 50s. So three of the all-time most famous directors were all practicing Catholics who brought a great deal of religion into their films. Sin is always a reoccurrent issue, punishment, that sort of thing. So this is a quote. It is interesting to note that three of the best directors who ever worked in Hollywood, Frank Capra, John Ford, and Alfred Hitchcock, were all practicing Catholics, so much for the detrimental effects in these times of the church upon art. Then we have Dostoevsky, who's generally considered to be the greatest writer ever in the Russian language, and is often cited as the greatest writer of all time. Dostoevsky was always a deeply religious man, deeply religious Orthodox Christian. Some of his theological ideas were not exactly the most orthodox, but broadly speaking, he was very devout, and throughout his long and difficult life, it was his faith that kept him sane. So this is to the degree that religion was important to him. If anyone could prove to me that Christ is outside of the truth, and if the truth really did exclude Christ, I should prefer to stay with Christ and not with truth. So then he also said, I believe in Christ and confess him, not like some child. By Hosanna has passed through an enormous furnace of doubt. So Dostoevsky suffered horribly throughout his life: addiction to alcohol, addiction to gambling, his wife dying, being sent to a gulag, money problems, etc. And he often faced doubt, but ultimately he believed very strongly in his faith. So I just put him in to add a bit of a balance. So we have a writer, we have some directors, we have a composer, and we have some scientists. I could go on and on and on, but it would take a very long amount of time to go through them all. So once again, this is not an argument as a demonstration that plenty of intelligent people believed in God, and many of them based a lot of their great achievements on it, and credited their faith with helping them to achieve things. Isaac Newton in particular stated he was merely discovering laws that God had laid down from time immemorial. Um, so I guess when people say you're stupid if you believe in religion, well, is Isaac Newton stupid? Is Rene Descartes stupid? Is the guy who discovered the Big Bang stupid? Was he uneducated? Did he not know about religion? And I'm not saying that dumb people don't believe in God, and I'm not saying that all smart people believe in God. But the argument advanced by the new atheists is basically everyone who does is stupid, and I don't think that's really a exaggeration. I don't say everyone who doesn't believe in God is stupid. I think a lot of the new atheists are not very good at philosophy, and their arguments aren't very sophisticated. I wouldn't. Richard Dawkins isn't a stupid man. I mean, he wouldn't be a doctor of like biology or whatever he is if he was a stupid man. Stephen Hawking clearly isn't a stupid man. I don't think either of them is very good at philosophy, and that's from my amateur perspective. I don't think they really understand the basics of forming a philosophical argument, although that's not their area of expertise. And I guess you could use that argument against these people, but that's not really my point. My point is that lots of smart people have faith, and a lot of smart people believe in it. So, I mean, if you feel alone, you feel like, oh, I'm dumb, I'm in this kind of hick thing because I do have faith. Well, you're in good company because Isaac Newton would agree with you, and so would Rene Descartes, and so would Mozart. So it's not as if you don't have people you can point to and say, hey, those guys, they discovered electromagnetism. Um, they're in my corner. Anyways, I just thought that was an interesting argument. This is Argent Templar signing out.